Hey, Bill,
Hey, Tim.
you get this one shot at me. I'm
How are you
I'm under
feeling?
the influence. I'm
How are you
I'm feeling
feeling?
pretty good.
Good.
Hydrocodone does wonders.
Yeah, good. Well, I hope it wasn't too serious, but it sounds like any surgery is serious.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured too, but we'll be fine.
Good.
All right, I'm gonna jump off video. Good to see you.
Mhm.
This. And Angela, let me just. All your efforts.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well deserved. Okie doke. Let's slam right into our recommendations today. Lori, do you guys in mental health, you don't have anything today, correct?
That is correct. We do not have one ready today. We will have one next week.
Okay, that's what I thought. So that brings us to Sheriff Helder, but I think Sheriff Helder wanted Dr. Hopkins to do the law enforcement and security recommendations.
Yes, ma'am, and I've got that information I can share. We've got a recommendation number 3 and recommendation number 5 is what I'm ready to present. And do I just go ahead and read through that and then make the recommendation?
You make the recommendation and then provide the justification.
Okay, so we're recommending that school resource officers should have instant access to certain equipment in the event of an active killer situation. Each officer should have within their go bag at a minimum the following items: level 4 body armor, ballistic helmet, forcible entry tools, medical first aid, trauma kits. Each campus should also have 1 ballistic shield, 1 set of level 4 body armor, 1 ballistic helmet, breaching tools, and additional first aid kits for easy access by law enforcement officers or commissioned school security officers in the event of an incident. The commissioned school security officers should receive proper instruction in the use of all listed items. It is imperative that officers assigned to serve in our schools be equipped with up-to-date tools to be used when called upon to respond to an active killer. Upon review of the Virginia Tech attack where the attacker chained and locked a door, not having the right equipment to mitigate those circumstances created a lengthy delay in engaging the suspect. Also in Uvalde, Texas, even though the door was unlocked, law enforcement officers believed it to be locked and precious time was wasted trying to breach or trying to locate breaching tools. We've seen in recent school attacks, suspects are using assault rifles and other high-powered weapons. Consistently, there is a need to give first responders instant access to ballistic shields and helmets to protect themselves as they engage the attackers. Sadly, we've learned that in attacks at Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Uvalde, and other incidents, those that were not killed instantly bled to death as they awaited trauma treatment.
And this corrects the issue about the CSSOs being included that we talked about last time,
It
correct?
does. It does.
Dr. Hopkins, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I move that we adopt recommendation number 3.
Would you read that again, please?
School resource officers should have instant access to certain equipment in the event of an active killer situation. Each officer should have within their go bag at a minimum the following items: level 4 body armor, ballistic helmet, forcible entry tools, medical first aid, trauma kits. Each campus should also have 1 ballistic shield, 1 set of level 4 body armor, 1 ballistic helmet, breaching tools, and additional first aid kits for easy access by law enforcement officers or commissioned school security officers in the event of an incident. The CSSOs should receive proper instruction in the use of all listed items.
And that's the recommendation.
That is the recommendation.
Okay, perfect. We have a recommendation. Is there,
Dr. May, I'll second.
is that Sheriff Helder back there?
It is. It is. I
It's
thought
good
it
to
was
hear your
probably
voice.
the best recommendation ever. Hey, but I do want to make a point of clarification, Doc. We had already voted on recommendation 3 a few weeks ago. This is a replacement for the recommendation 3. We had to do some cleanup work on it. So we can either look at it as a new recommendation or modified to number 3.
Yeah, I think it would be better to do it as a modification. I'm just trying to think how we go ahead and do that.
Amendment, I guess if David allows, his motion could be to make a friendly amendment to the recommendation 3, and I would also second that.
So Dr.
work?
Hopkins, would you be willing to do that? Because I think that's the best way to move forward.
Certainly, yes.
Okay,
I recommend it as an amendment to our original
okay.
recommendation.
When you do your motion, because we haven't had a vote, in the motion say that we amend recommendation 3 to be the following.
Okay. Well, I would move that we amend recommendation 3 to be the following as presented. Or would you rather me read that again?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, you're way down there, aren't you?
Okay. School resource officers should, and this is the amended version. School resource officers should have instant access to certain equipment in the event of an active killer situation. Each officer should have within their go bag at a minimum the following items: level 4 body armor, ballistic helmet, forcible entry tools, medical first aid, trauma kits. Each campus should also have 1 ballistic shield, 1 set of level 4 body armor, 1 ballistic helmet, breaching tools, and additional first aid kits for easy access by law enforcement officers or commissioned school security officers in the event of an incident. The CSSOs should receive proper instruction in the use of all listed items. That's the motion.
I second.
Any discussion? Dr. Dunn, are you wanting to say something? You're just wanting to wave at me from afar, right? Okay. Okay, there being no discussion, Angela, would you please take the roll?
Dr. May,
Yes.
Mr. Kane,
Yes.
Chief Chapman,
Yes.
Mr. Du Bois,
Yes.
Dr. Dunn,
Yes.
Ms. Gann,
Yes.
Mr. Gary,
Yes.
Ms. Graham,
Yes.
Sheriff Helder,
Yes.
Dr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Kiefer, Ms. Poston,
Yes.
Ms. Salas Ford,
Yes.
Mr. Temple.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Super.
And Dr. May, this is Bill Hollenbeck. I say yay as well. I'm sorry, I signed in a little bit late.
Good to hear you, Chief.
Okay, we've got recommendation 5 now to present. Whenever the chair is ready.
Ready when you are, sir.
Okay. Schools should develop strategies that layer and build redundancy for optimal security. In 2018, the commission identified several strategies where law enforcement officers or commissioned school security officers could be utilized in layering and building redundancy. Some of these include recruiting former certified law enforcement officers as auxiliary officers as defined by the Arkansas Commission on Law Enforcement Standards and Training, or commissioned school security officers, collaborating with law enforcement and seek ways to increase officer training and visibility, officer traffic and visibility on campus. For example, the Benton and Bentonville police departments have implemented a policy that directs law enforcement officers to conduct safety checks throughout the schools in their jurisdiction. These and other departments have asked law enforcement officers to park their squad cars in the school's parking lot while they complete reports or visit schools during lunch. Using current or retired law enforcement officers as substitute teachers and/or allocating office space within the school for law enforcement officers to use during the day to complete reports and other administrative tasks. The Arkansas School Safety Commission has strongly recommended for armed security to be provided for every classroom building. Districts should use multiple officers per site to ensure continuity of protection. This can be achieved by using a combination of school resource officers and commissioned school security officers. If a district and its jurisdictional law enforcement agency is unable to provide continuity protection with their personnel, the commission strongly recommends that they work with other adjacent agencies to develop strategies that would provide the personnel needed to maintain uninterrupted protection.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second Dr. May.
I think Mr. Kiefer got you before.
Sounds good.
Okay, sorry about that. There is one point of clarification. And I say this every time we bring up CSSOs and we recommend CSSOs. I think it's important for everybody to understand that our previous commission and the current commission recommend CSSOs only if the heightened requirements are used.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that's covered because it dovetails into previous recommendations that we've made with this.
Okay,
That-
okay,
that
as
it's
long
clear
as
that the CSSOs, that our recommendation is that they have that enhanced training
the enhanced training, that's absolutely correct. And the
and vetting.
and the vetting through the standard psychological exam and random drug screening. But most importantly, that training with local law enforcement, which is critically important. The other thing that I wanted to mention on this too, before we vote, this also ties in, I think, and Sheriff Helder and Dr. Hopkins, correct me if I'm wrong, of the issue of an SRO being assigned to a school or a campus and having to leave because they take a day off or because they have training that they have to take. And so one of the key elements of why this is so important is to make sure that there is somebody at the school at all times. Correct?
That is correct.
Yes, ma'am. That's what we were trying to achieve through this justification process without getting overly pointed. But I think that we covered all the bases where the school districts and law enforcement and or adjacent law enforcement should work out some method by which they would not be without armed security.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't get to choose the day that something could happen. So you have to be prepared at all times.
Very, very, very good point, sir. Any other discussion on this topic at all? Okay, Angela, would you please take roll?
Dr. May,
Yes.
Mr. Kane,
Yes.
Chief Chapman,
Yes.
Mr. DuBois,
Yes.
Dr. Dunn,
Yeah.
Ms. Gann,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Gary, Graham,
Yes.
Sheriff Helder,
Yes.
Chief Hollenbeck,
Yes.
Dr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Kiefer, Ms. Poston,
Yes.
Ms. Salas Ford,
Yes.
Mr. Temple.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Super. Thank you all very, very much. Secretary Gary, you guys don't have any this time, correct?
That is correct. We don't have any new ones. I do have a question though, based on what we did on the law enforcement one. We, in compiling all of this together for you in a final report, we had 6 recommendations, but actually is 9, but 3 of them are into one. But there's one that's probably going to be a kind of a word change clarification. If that's made as the subcommittee and submitted to you, it could be voted on full commission, right? We don't need to bring those back every time there's a small.
That's actually on my list to talk about after we're done
Okay.
with recommendations, because I've noticed some other ones that I think might need just a teeny tiny tweak,
So you want to hold that conversation till later?
if you don't mind.
All right. In that case, Madam Chair, I don't have anything further.
Okay, thank you. All right. Next up is intelligence and communication, Chief Chapman.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So the recommendation that was emailed out Friday, we actually have changed some of the wording on that recommendation, Madam Chair. I'd like to present the newly crafted recommendation if that's acceptable.
Yes, sir.
All right, the Intelligence and Communication Subcommittee would like to recommend our recommendation number 4. Law enforcement should coordinate with school districts to ensure that there is limited access to existing law enforcement communication network for critical incidents, i.e. the radios. We recommend for new radio systems that are being developed by law enforcement that they consider the school districts as part of their initial build out. Radio system use should be allowed with limited use during critical incidents only, and be restricted to certain school administrators and staff. So the importance of proper communication has been identified in nearly every after action and debrief of every critical incident that we've seen across this country. The ability for critical information to be passed immediately from key stakeholders is imperative to saving lives. It was noted that critical information was not being passed in the Uvalde incident. The chief of police actually didn't even pick up his radio and take it into the school building. We understand that because of a lack of a proper communication plan, that information wasn't being shared by the victims calling 911, and that wasn't being relayed to the officers on scene. Based on a presentation by our subject matter expert, Penny Rubo, we understand that school districts cannot be added as an entire entity on the AWIN system, but there is limited capacity to allow for use during critical incidents. Therefore, the recommendation again would be based on radios and access being limited to critical staff members only. And these staff members would be allowed to use the radio system during a critical incident to effectively and immediately communicate with first responders. We also understand that not every jurisdiction will join the AWIN radio system. So we want to encourage the agreement between local law enforcement and school districts be put in place to allow for limited access on whatever the radio system may be built. Limited radio access should be allowed for school districts during critical incidents for existing communication systems, as well as those being built in the future. From a cost build out standpoint, we encourage that law enforcement agencies build new radios. As they build new radio systems, they add the school district critical staff to the radio assignment list, with those selected having limited access to only be used during a critical incident. This will help limit the cost to school districts. And as an example, we just currently built out a new radio system in Hot Springs and Garland County, and the cost would have been extremely low to add the school districts into the initial build out compared to the cost to add them at this point, ma'am.
That's great. Do I have a second? And then we'll have some discussion.
Second.
Somebody, those people up there are slow. Secretary Gary is the second. Okay. Any discussion? I do have one question, Chief.
Yes, ma'am.
Or maybe one point of clarification for me. I think originally when we were talking about radios for schools, that we thought that all radios being used should be AWIN compatible. Is that still correct?
I think the discussion that we had as a subcommittee, ma'am, is that if you purchase a new radio now for new systems,
Uh-huh.
they have to be P25 compatible. Is that correct, Secretary Geary? So that meets that
Okay.
request of the subcommittee. But we didn't want to limit ourselves to the AWIN conversation. That's why we stated all existing radio systems.
Right. But
so-
if schools are
Yes.
going to buy new radios now, whether it's the intent to access the system for their current law enforcement agency, non-AWIN, or through an AWIN connection, those radios should all be AWIN compatible.
It is our understanding that first responder radios now are required to be compatible, P25 compatible. So any radio they'd be purchasing would be AWIN capable, ma'am.
Okay. So that's what P25 means.
Yes, ma'am. Is
Okay.
that correct, Secretary?
It is, and just to clarify a little further, that if you buy a P25 radio, that doesn't mean it automatically connects to AWIN. You have to go through steps to do that.
Yes, sir.
But I just want to make that clear for anybody on the line. And
That bridging capability that we had talked about from a command and control situation, as long as it's a P25 compatible radio, we could bridge to the AWIN system. I believe
Okay.
we have the right.
right,
Okay.
and to me, the critical thing is that local school district can communicate over the radio system with that local police department.
Right.
Whether they're operating an AWIN system or a standalone system, the critical point is that they have that communication between law enforcement and the school district.
But if they buy new radios now, they need to be P25 AWIN compatible.
Yes, if they're
Yeah.
going to talk to their local law enforcement, and all law enforcement radios now have to be P25 compatible. I believe that that's a requirement. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just wanted to make sure because I don't want folks to think, and we've got that grant out there, and radios might be a part of a request.
I'll be glad to add that into the justification language.
I think that might clarify it for the final report, Chief.
I'll be glad to add that, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments or anything on that?
Didn't really understand that. Can you read it again?
Could you use your microphone, Dr. Dunn? Thank you, ma'am.
Can you read it one more time? There was something I didn't quite follow.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm struggling today. I've got a
No.
head cold. But the recommendation reads as following. Law enforcement should coordinate with school districts to ensure that there is limited access to existing law enforcement communication networks for critical incidents, i.e. their radio system. We recommend for new radio systems that are being developed by law enforcement that they consider the school district as a part of the initial build out. So any new radio systems being built, add them as a user. Radio system use should be allowed and limited use during critical incidents only and be restricted to certain school administration staff. So the first section is covering existing radio systems. We want to ensure that schools and law enforcement have the ability to communicate with one another on an existing radio system, whether that's AWINs or non-AWIN system. And then any new radio systems that are being built out, that the law enforcement agency consider adding the school districts into their talk groups initially. That will save a huge cost on the school districts if they do that on the front end.
I think the word that confused me there was limited use.
Yes, ma'am. And limited is actually very important.
Okay.
Because it's a capacity issue. And so let's just take a medium-sized school district. If they had full access to the radio system with the bus drivers, maintenance, administration, it would clog the system up. And so we want to limit that access for critical incidents only, especially if they're being added into the law enforcement network.
And also maybe a privacy issue with school folks not being able to listen to everything that's going on within the police department
Yeah,
or the community.
yeah, I understand that.
Okay, but that
Is
was
it
a great
clear?
question
Is
because
it clear?
that generated another question for me.
You're
So I
welcome.
appreciate you asking that. Because, and I'm going to, in my recollection of how the Conway system is built out, the schools are on that system full time. They're just on a different talk group. So this recommendation would not preclude, like Clarksville, from having a talk group on that radio system that can be monitored by the city, but is strictly for their buses or anything,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
This is primarily focused on critical incidents.
Okay.
And I guess that would go back to a local capacity issue.
Right.
So Conway had the capacity to add them. Other jurisdictions may not. I would think Little Rock would struggle adding a school district the size of Little Rock to their talk groups, but based on what Penny was telling us, especially with the AWIN system, it does need to be limited access. Thank you.
Okay, are you guys way down there? Are you done with your conversation, your discussions?
Yeah.
Okay, Angela, would you take the roll?
Dr. May,
Yes.
Mr. Kane,
Yes.
Chief Chapman,
Yes.
Mr. DuBois,
Yes.
Dr. Dunn,
Yes.
Miss Gann,
Yes.
Mr. Gary, Graham, Sheriff Helder,
Yes.
Chief Hollenbeck,
Yes.
Dr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Kiefer,
Yes.
Miss Poston,
Yes.
Miss Salas Ford, Mr. Temple.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Super. Thank you very much, Chief. Okay, last and definitely not least is physical securities. Mr. Kane?
Madam Chair, Commission, I have a couple recommendations here before you, and these should be our last unless we come up with more after we see the survey. So the first one is district campuses should have anti-shatter resistant film at the campus building entrance. The justification for this is the shatter resistance film will protect the students and staff members from an intruder gaining quick access into the rest of the building. It will slow down the intruder's ability to enter the building and allow more time for first responders. At Sandy Hook, the intruder shot through a plate glass window next to Sandy Hook's locked front entrance in order to quickly and easily gain access to the school. So I'd like to make the following recommendation. District campuses should have anti-shatter resistant film at the campus building entrance.
Dr. Hopkins, second. Any discussion on this one?
Hey, Tim, I'm sorry, I
Yes,
I
sir.
don't have it in front of me, but did you just describe that as anti-shatter resistant? Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Or is
sir.
it shatter resistant?
Anti-shatter.
Anti-shatter
Resistant.
resistant?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it just didn't sound right to me, but I'm certainly in favor of it.
They've got their own
It
language.
sounds like if you're anti-shatter resistant, sounds like it would shatter. It sounds like a double negative.
But
is
what
that-
it is
is
that it's anti-shatter resistant, which means it's not completely anti-shatter.
Right.
Right,
It's-
Tim?
It's the same, and I don't have it in
Is
front
that
of
an
me,
industry
but it's the
term?
same language we used a couple weeks ago when we talked about looking into the
I-
classroom doors, having that vision panel on the side or in the door. It's that same material.
It's kind of
Okay.
like we used to call them bulletproof vests, but now they're bullet resistant vests.
Yeah.
It's same general philosophy here, because it's not proof, it's resistant.
The main
Correct?
thing, the main thing that it does, we installed some several years ago. And the goal was like in Sandy Hook, the shooter came up, shot the front door with the front door was the shatter type glass so that it doesn't cut with the big jagged pieces. And so it shattered and fell out. Well, he walks through that space and gains access to the building. What this film does is that the glass shatters, but the film holds everything together and in place. And then you have to fight your way through that film to get through the opening. So that's the security part of it, to try to keep someone from gaining access
That's
or to
correct.
slow them down.
That's correct.
I just,
I've got a quick question. Wouldn't it be better for that to be like all campus building entrances? I know we're trying to limit them down to one entrance, but what would keep somebody from coming to any other entrance? So wouldn't this be better for all doors, all campus doors? Right, correct. All exterior doors.
That have glass.
Correct.
Because I don't know, maybe, you know, the superintendents can help us. How frequent is it for there to be other glass entrances?
I mean, it can happen. I guess my thought on this is that when we put it on, it's very expensive film, very expensive. And I think that that's one of the considerations that you need to take is that, you know, if in a perfect world, if funds are available, absolutely. Put it in all those places. But I think that, you know, if you have to choose a location, the front entrance is where it needs to go. I don't know if that helps.
Well, maybe the wording is at least on the front entrance. Would that make you feel better, Joe?
I think so. I mean, but still, I mean, we're kind of limited to that. We're thinking that the active shooter is going to come in this particular entrance. But you think about it, there's numerous doors. I'm thinking of the school that I'm local with, and there's numerous doors for them to come in. So it's kind of a,
That has glass.
yeah, it's
Okay.
it's kind of a lost cause, I guess you could say.
Mr. Kane, what do you think?
I mean, it is a recommendation. It's not required. And in our facility manual, we do require it for that entrance, that secure vestibule having shatter resistant glass or film. So as far as a recommendation, I mean, I'm okay with it because it is a recommendation to do all.
So is this saying do all? Or is it just saying that this needs to be done at the campus building entrance, which I think is what Joe's point is, if I understand correctly. Do you want to, you guys have a meeting in the morning. Do you want to just spend a minute
Yeah,
talking about that
we'll do
and
that.
see?
We'll go back and look at that and I'll double check that language while we're at it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Joe. We'll look at that. All right. The next recommendation is district campuses should have physical barriers such as bollards, landscaping, fencing, low walls, et cetera, at school entrances, especially the main entrance.
See, there's verbiage there. You'll just
Yeah.
have to excuse me,
Yeah.
but there's
I
kind of
noticed that
verbiage
too.
there that could be mirrored
Right.
in your in your first recommendation, where it says at school entrances, especially the main entrance. And I think
Right.
that would
I
take it.
noticed that too.
So we may let's do this one and then maybe we can come back to the other.
Okay. And justification is very short on this one, but what this does, it provides exterior protection for the building. It reduces or mitigates the ability for an intruder to use a vehicle to drive into the building or the campus. And on our, I'll just say in addition, in our facility manual for new facilities, these are required. So we're basically making a recommendation in all facilities for what we require in the new ones. So I'll make the recommendation that I recommend that district campuses should have physical barriers such as bollards, landscaping, fencing, low walls, et cetera, at school entrances, especially the main entrance.
I'll second that.
Who was that second from? Oh, Chief Chapman. Any discussion on this one? Hearing none, Angelo, roll please.
Dr. May,
Yes.
Mr. Kane,
Yes.
Chief Chapman,
Yes.
Mr. DuBois,
Yes.
Dr. Dunn, Ms. Gann,
I agree.
Mr. Gary,
Yes.
Ms. Graham, Elder,
Yes.
Chief Hollenbeck,
Yes.
Dr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Kiefer,
Yes.
Ms. Poston,
Yes.
Ms. Salas Ford, Mr. Temple.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, do you want to go back to the first one? Do you
I did.
see the easy fix in
I
my
did.
mind anyway?
Think so.
Okay,
Let me try this again. District campuses should have anti-shatter resistant film at school entrances, especially the main entrance.
bingo.
Just borrow the language.
Any discussion on this one? Angela, would you please take the roll?
May I ask a question? Does that mean that Dr. Hopkins second? The-
Yeah,
Okay, the revised wording. Okay.
Can I hold for just a second? I'm
Ah,
sorry.
you're-
I did find you are right. That is a double negative. I checked the language and the justification. The other one, good catch. Thank you. And Sheriff, thank you. So I would like to make one more motion. if
it's
I
going to be
could.
anti-shatter,
It's
right?
going to be shatter resistant film.
Okay,
Yeah. So I apologize for that. Good catch. Thank you.
okay. Do you
Okay,
want to,
I'm
do
gonna
you
make.
want to
the
make another motion?
motion. I do. District campuses should have shatter resistant film at school entrances, especially the main entrance.
Second. too.
Any discussion?
The hydrocodone has given me laser focus, Tim.
Oh. Okay, no further discussion? All right, Angela, would you take the roll, please?
Dr. May,
Yes.
Mr. Kane,
Yes.
Chief Chapman,
Yes.
Mr. DuBois,
Yes.
Dr. Dunn,
Yes.
Ms. Gann, Mr. Gary,
Yes.
Ms. Graham, Sheriff Elder,
Yes.
Chief Hollenbeck,
Yes.
Dr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Kiefer,
Yes.
Ms. Poston,
Yes.
Ms. Salas Ford, Mr. Temple.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Super. Thank you. Okay, that's it for the regular official recommendations today. There are a couple of things that I really would like for us to talk about. Once again, if there's any way that we can get all the justifications and the recommendations to me by end of this week, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, and I'd like for you all to be very aware of, is that just like this recommendation, you may have a document like the ones that we all shared before these votes, and then there's a revision that's done in the actual during the actual commission vote. Please go back and double check the minutes to make sure that the corrected or modified version is the one in there. And then there's a couple of, and these may be little moot questions. But sometimes I think the way some of these, like I'm gonna use this, Chief Chapman, because you're here. Your recommendation 3, I don't know what date it was, but school districts should develop capabilities to monitor communication platforms to include social media outlets as it relates to threats or triggering phrases used by potential active attack suspects. That should be only for district own devices. Correct? And then there was one, oh, and this is you guys too. I know, and I'm sorry, but it has to do with the awareness training for cybersecurity for all school staff. We're talking about and provide monthly ongoing cyber hygiene and potential threat training. I think that should be, instead of training, it should be awareness, threat awareness. So we may have to bring those back, and I'll look at all the others in the same light. I know there was one, I think, in audits. Yeah, there was. So see, Chief, I'm just not picking on you. Recommendation 3, Secretary Gary, routine safety checks are conducted regularly. Maybe schools should conduct routine safety checks regularly. It's just the way it's worded. And I didn't see that the first time. So look at those recommendations through that prism, and we can clean up anything that needs to be cleaned up. It should be really easy next time. And I think that would help greatly. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that from the school safety assessment, the survey that we did. I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but there were some things that I think are pretty glaring that we need to, I need to at least make you all aware of. As you know, the legislation that was passed back in 2021 required schools to provide floor plans to first responding agencies. And they needed to do that by October 1, 2021. When we asked the question about if they've completed that, there were 48 schools that said they had not.
Dr. May, just a clarification, is that 48 schools or
School
48
districts.
districts? Okay.
The other one that I found very, very interesting is that we obviously asked whether or not the districts have completed their comprehensive school safety audit, which we're now going to call assessment going forward, as required by, I think it's Act 620 and 648. I get them confused all the time. Courtney, forgive me if correct me if I'm wrong. Am I okay? Okay, good deal. 620 and 648. And 73%, about 180 schools said that they have. But if you remember, part of that school safety audit was to include review of their emergency operation plans, and they must conduct a climate and culture survey. So when we asked them if they've completed a culture and climate survey within the last 3 years, 60% of the schools said no. So I think we're going to have to do a little bit of awareness to make sure that they understand that culture and climate surveys are required as part of that school safety assessment. that's required by law? Because those culture and climate surveys are very important. I will also mention that, we asked them the question if, funding were available for additional school resource officers or CSSOs, would they use that funding? 96% said yes. We also ask if they, if a 24/7 statewide anonymous or confidential reporting system were available, would they use it? 97% said yes. And then another question that focused on a coordinated statewide crisis response process would be helpful to the district in the event of a critical incident, and 94% said yes. So I think those three are really important. I also went through we gave those who completed the survey the opportunity to have an open-ended question. I kid you not, I think 90% of the responses included something about funding. Now, not every school district had provided an open-ended statement, but funding was just boom, 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 boom. It was like a flashing light. Now, having said that, we've also previously talked about that there might be some recommendations that we make that really don't fit neatly in any of our 5 subcommittees. That maybe we want to make general recommendations at the commission level. And so I think obviously, and you all correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think we need to make some statement about funding for the schools. I don't know how you all feel about it. This is an open forum, but I'd really like to do that. The governor is making the $50 million available for pretty much one-time projects that are related, obviously, to school safety. But, if you look at some of these things that we're asking them to do, these are ongoing amounts and not one time. So would it be even reasonable to suggest that something like the matrix be used to provide continuing school safety funding? Dr. Hopkins, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I appreciate you bringing this up, and absolutely, there needs to be some sort of mechanism in place, I believe, to continually provide schools with the funds they need to put in place these recommendations that are not a one-time expenditure, such as resource officers, commissioned school security officers, things of that nature, where you're going to have continued costs year after year with that. And, schools are provided the funding through the state and through local funds to meet a mission. And anytime we change the parameters of that mission, which adding these security measures into that changes those parameters, funding has to be provided because they're only given the funding associated with what their job is at a public school.
Right. And from my perspective, this would be for new SROs or new CSSOs. We want this funding to be able to expand what the schools are currently doing. And, we talked about other things like having a school safety coordinator on each campus. To me, that's one of the most important fundamental things that a school district can do. And being able to potentially have a stipend to be able to offer someone or something that has to do with staff doing school safety specific type work.
I would agree.
Somebody besides Dr. Hopkins and I, your thoughts, please. Can you put your microphone? You're so far away, I can't hear you.
We're far away. I hadn't heard that.
No.
I work with safety coordinators every day on every campus. There is not enough money in the world to give them, but they deserve something. They go far beyond what I think most people realize, maybe even their administrators. And they do it on their planning periods, because they have school duties. I'm definitely for it. When I win the lottery, I'll pitch in a little there.
Because the other thing that's really important to me, and I don't know how we potentially address this, but oftentimes when it comes to the matrix, it's a per student allocation of funding. We've got small and poor schools that, don't have a school resource officer or a commissioned school security officer program because they can't afford it. It would be nice if there was some way that we could have there be a minimum amount of money that the schools are given for school safety that could assist poorer and smaller schools to get the kind of resources that we think are important.
Dr.
Secretary
May.
Gary. Oop.
Go ahead.
Who's talking to me up there?
That's Bill Hollenbeck.
Hey, Chief.
I was just wanting to echo your comments and everybody else's comments. It's so important that our whole mission is to help our schools to be successful in protecting our students and providing a safe and secure learning environment. But, if we do not address the funding, we are not addressing the overall issue of helping our schools to succeed. We're almost putting in unfunded, not mandates, but unfunded recommendations. I think it is so important that we address the funding through probably the matrix of the funding that each school receives. So I'm so very glad that we're having this conversation. It's very important to make sure schools succeed.
Yeah. And some of them do become mandated.
Absolutely.
Look at the laws that we just passed easy for me to say, last legislative session.
Correct.
Full legislative session. So how do we want to proceed on this?
I'd like to say that from my understanding of it, the legislature, they have a committee that they use the House Ed and the Senate Ed, and they come together and they work through the matrix and they study the funding issues for the districts. And so that I think that the approach would be that group look at the requirements and then look at what kind of funding does it take to put these requirements in place. And then they have the ability to factor that into, what is the cost per student so that they can build that into the matrix so that it's appropriate for different size districts and different wealth indexes of districts.
That's right. They do have the wealth index.
Dr. May, if something like that were to move forward, would that then become a requirement as opposed to a recommendation? If the fund, you know what I'm saying? If they meet and we don't mandate at our level, but somebody would then have to mandate whichever of these recommendations come out. Is that correct? If they're going to fund it, otherwise, if they increase the matrix, how then are we able to determine that they're spending it on the recommendations that we've made? All right,
I knew Courtney was going to jump in. And thank you for doing that, Courtney.
Of course, and I'm not a finance expert by any means, but so the matrix is a funding model, not a spending model. And so if the legislature went through the adequacy process and determined to provide school districts funding through the matrix and through certain line items, they can't require them to spend that on SROs. They would have to make it like a categorical or some other type of funding. So if you want it to be restricted funding, it has to be done kind of through a different way, I guess is what I'm saying.
Instead of the matrix?
Instead of through the main part of the matrix, right?
Okay.
There are a couple of categoricals in the matrix, but that's not considered really part of adequacy, if that makes any sense.
Right. So what I'm hearing from Sheriff Helder, though, is that we want to restrict the use of this funding to school safety.
Well,
Right. So I think that would need to be a restricted fund. And so you might just say that they consider funding to be restricted for the use of SROs or school safety, however you want to word that. But I would use the phrase restricted funding and not just part of the matrix, because that would not be restricted funding.
Okay, let me just take the temperature on everybody. How many of you think that we need to pursue this funding issue? Show your hands. I won't take a roll call. Let me ask this, because I can't see him.
My hand's
behind
raised.
me. I can't see him behind me. Now I lost my train of thought. Are there anybody that's opposed to this? And I'm not going to look behind me. Okay, that's what I thought. So, and I think the other general consensus that I'm hearing is that that should be restricted.
yeah, when Courtney brought that up, that immediately triggered. I had been thinking about this. It's been several months ago, but absolutely, I think a categorical fund is where that needs to go.
Because I don't know much about the matrix and how that works. So maybe this is one of those recommendations that Courtney, maybe we can work on, because I can't see me trying to come up with one of these on my own.
Yeah, and again, I have a base knowledge of it, but I would want to consult with our finance people to make sure we got the wording of what is intended of the committee or the commission accurately.
Okay.
So quick question. So on the matrix, on the category part, is that based like the rest of it on per student and wealth index, or do we know? And if we don't have an answer.
I think it depends. I think there are pieces of it that are per student, but then there are other pieces that have some other formula in rule that determines how it's allocated.
Yeah, the matrix, what it does is it builds out the foundation funding for the school districts. And that's the amount per student, just the typical head count. And then when you get into your categoricals, you're looking at your English second language students, your alternative learning students. You break into those categories, and that money flows directly to the interest of those groups. And that's the categorical funding. Whereas in the matrix, it's a formula that's set up to say, okay, schools are supposed to provide X, Y, Z. This is about what it would take to do this based on a 500 student prototypical district. We scale that up. We match that with what it would be per student. And then that funding flows to the district. And again, that is a funding model, not an expenditure model. And that's a big deal for school districts, for local control to be able to spend the money where it needs to go. And so Courtney was exactly right in stating that, and I agree, that if that funding we are recommending needs to go into security, so it would need to flow through a categorical fund to get there. It's set up strictly for security.
I'm wondering, is there somebody next time that can come talk to us a little bit about how this process works? And
Yeah, I could have our CFO see if he could come.
okay, that would be great. That would be awesome. And this is kind of along the same lines, early on in the commission, there were a couple of federal bills that were passed, and, we talked about the federal funding. And one of the questions, actually the last question that we asked on the survey, was whether or not schools had staff that they felt would be capable of applying or completing a federal grant application. And 15% of the school districts said they didn't. 85%, the upside, 85% said they did. So to me, that's important because that money is available and we need to encourage them to apply for these grants to get additional things done. I know they're one-time funding, and I know this 50 million, is going to be able to do some things, but it's not going to be able to do everything. So one of the things I thought of, and I wanted us to discuss as a group, is, Dr. Hopkins, for example, has said numerous times that the education, and correctly, that the education co-ops are very good resources for our districts. Is there some way that we might want to consider encouraging the education co-ops to do a consortium that could function to help provide grant writing support to schools that don't have that capability themselves? Boy, that fell on flat ears, didn't it? Any thoughts, pro or con, on that?
Dr. May, what was the percentage again that said they didn't have the capacity?
15%. There's a small percentage of schools that don't have that capability. Okay.
So Dr.
All right.
I don't really feel like I'm the best person to speak to this because I'm not in the education world. But I think it could be a really great resource for some of these schools. And, we have, at my agency, we have kind of a team that focuses on grant writing. And I would think that a lot of communities do have a person that is kind of the known local resource or expert for that could probably work with some schools. I mean, I think, to have a way for those schools to look for someone in their area that might be a support to help them in that process, because that really is a great way to get funding to support certain initiatives or purchases that you need to make.
Yeah, once again, it's an access to money, and I suspect that these schools that don't have this kind of person that's capable of writing grants, competitive grants for them, they're probably smaller and poorer schools. So that's the part of this that bothers me, is that this would be one way in which to be able to provide some services to them. I did talk to Darren Beckwith, who is on our Safe Schools Committee, and he felt that would be something that the education co-ops, maybe a small group of them, could do. But I'd like to put it forth as a recommendation, but only if you all felt that it was, it's not going to be binding, but that it would be a good recommendation.
Dr. May, just out of curiosity, are the 15 districts geographically, are they in a similar or the same area of the state, which would limit, you wouldn't have to require all co-ops to do it then if you could identify 4 or 5, you know what I mean? If that would cover the 15 districts, but I don't really know if they're all over the state. I don't guess that would work.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, Sheriff, and I can round back to our colleagues at UA Little Rock and see if they can dial down into some of that data for me, because you're right. You make a very, very good point that if they are in certain geographic areas, that would make it a lot less complicated to do something like this.
Well, it
No,
just seems like if 85% are already doing or have the capability, we surely don't want to miss the 15%, right? I mean, we don't want to be overly cumbersome on the co-ops that are covered by the districts that already have somebody on staff. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Overall, I'm in favor of this.
Dr. May, the Clarksville School District is a member of the Guy Fincher Co-op.
Mhm.
And I know in our co-op, like with, when we have, like with our agri classes, our industrial maintenance class, things of that nature, we've got a go-to person in our co-op that helps us write grants and works with the department and helps us
So
put
these
those.
specialists already exist.
Yes. And what I'm saying though is that, but they're kind of tailored for a particular umbrella of what
Gotcha.
source resources that they go after. And so I guess my thought on this is I think it would be obviously wonderful to have support at a co-op for school districts to try to look at grants and things of that nature to forward this, the security processes
For
in
school
their
safety.
school safety. Absolutely. So yes, I think it's something that certainly needs to be looked at. And of course, I haven't thought about that part of it a lot as far as the grant part of it, but overall, I think a security person in the co-ops that is a security expert, so to speak, and is also up to speed on the grants and the capabilities and of what it takes to go and get those grants and put those together for the schools, I think would be a tremendous asset for school districts across the state.
Because you broadened it a little bit there on me.
I did.
Hey, Dr. May, one question I've got about this is that of those 85% that do have staff capable of doing these type of grant applications, are they being fully utilized? I mean, are they actually going after these grants?
We don't know. I mean, we looked at the number of grants that were awards in Arkansas. We looked at the COPS funding, community oriented policing services funding, and we also looked at the Bureau of Justice Assistance Stop School Violence grant, and there were only a few Arkansas grants awarded. I don't know the number of grant applications that were actually submitted, but I do know that there were a small number of awards.
Yeah, it just seems like if we had enough information to say that it's not being fully utilized, maybe that would be, something we could recommend. But we may not have that enough information to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if we could get that information as quickly as we need it.
Yeah.
But what was going through my head was just basically the idea that, you can't apply for a grant if you don't have somebody that's going to be able to write it.
That's right. Yes.
And looking at these other districts, districts, I guess they help each other from time to time, I'm assuming. So
Well, a lot of
there's got
times
to
the
be
grant
some
writing,
mechanism here.
well, a lot of times the grant writing is, it does revolve around the co-op. We'll write grants through Workforce Ed or something of that nature, but it may apply to multiple districts. I know that recently we did apply for a COPS grant, or we attempted to apply, and it was all based around information that we received at our co-op from a person that approached us from out of state that was kind of pushing some of these things. And so quite a few schools in our co-op attempted to do that. I think some of them were successful. We were not successful because apparently the system was glitchy or something in the time frame that we were trying to put that in. It was a federal grant that we were working on, a COPS grant.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's a lot
Well,
going on with that co-op thought, though,
Yeah.
that's kind of the center of.
I think maybe what's sort of going through my head too is that maybe we need to come up with a recommendation, is that schools try to access or districts try to access this federal money. Encourage them to access federal money, and because there's going to be a lot of it out there. But I just think that on the federal end of things, we need to try to frame something. So think about that. We can talk about it again next time. I mean, we've got only a couple more meetings left, believe it or not. But before, there's a couple more things. The other issue that I think that we need to address in this bigger umbrella is the whole issue of accountability. And that kind of gets to what, Sheriff Helder was kind of there last time, but it's really important to me that schools do implement as much of this as they possibly can. And that if there is a state law that's passed, that they're actually fulfilling the requirements in that law. And, in my opinion, and I just want to start this conversation, in my opinion, there's only one group of folks that can step in and have the kind of accountability that we need in this situation. And that's DESE. And I also firmly believe that in order to have the amount of accountability that we need, that DESE cannot do that with Jerry Kiefer only. I mean, we can clone you, Jer. They'll run you ragged. So I think there's an enormous need here for us to stand up for accountability, and also talk about there possibly being a unit at DESE that focuses on accountability and helping schools also find the resources, not be the resources, but find the resources through the center, through CISA, through a variety of things that may be out there. So thoughts on that?
Do school districts go through the legislative audit and stuff, like cities and counties and everything? Would not some of these things, aren't they looked at during that audit process? I know when we're audited, they look at everything, how we check out vehicles and everything else. So would that not automatically be added to the audit procedures?
I don't know exactly how that works, but I don't think at the school level, they look down to that specific. I know they look at our procedures and things, but I think in terms of safe schools coordinators, that's more done through our public school monitoring. But they're so overrun with the academic parts of it.
Right.
And I mean, adding anything else on there, but I don't know specifically your answer about legislative audit.
You know, continuity of operations was a big one that they were checking us for a few years ago. And I'll just ask a question or pose a question too, is under DESI, you know, you've got the department, you've got facilities, and you know, a lot of security stuff falls under facilities too. So I mean, some of the question too might be, where would that, how would that be?
And they do,
set up
I mean,
and-
they do those, their audits. And there's a lot that they've added
Right.
to that, but there's also other things. And obviously, you know, there are rules and procedures that are approved by the State Board of Education, correct? Courtney, and those, and then what happens after that? I don't know. I just really want some more accountability.
Yeah.
And I think DESI is in a great position to be able to be the one that can work with schools that way. I mean, the center is very, very different in the sense that we provide the resources, most of the resources. There's some that I think DESI is much better positioned to provide, particularly on the mental health side of things than the center is. But when it comes to the accountability, you know, even on the compliance side of things, on the SRO stuff, we're legislatively mandated to do that, and we are doing that. But yet at the same time, I personally only think that the group that's going to have the most chance of doing this in a way that it needs to be done is DESI. Does anybody else think we need to focus on accountability?
Yes.
Dr. May, if I could,
Yeah,
just to address what you said, Dr. Hopkins, just the facility slides, which I know is a small piece, but you know, one of the recommendations that we passed was to include these security audits into our regular inspection. And I think that's going to make a difference, specifically exterior door access, classroom doors closed and locked, exterior doors closed and locked, visitor management system, and those kind of things that we did. Another thing that I forget about even sometimes, because I'm thinking about it existing, but as time goes on, as time marches on, there's going to be new schools built, and all those have to go through the new security standards in the facility manual that was passed 3 years ago or so.
right.
And so with each new school, it's going to have pretty much all these things we talked about
Right.
are going to be mandated in a new school. So as time marches on, our schools are going to be made more safe from a physical security standpoint, just because the design,
Yep.
it's going to be designed in.
Yep. And that's really important. So somebody else? Anybody else on this issue? Do you want to move forward on an accountability?
I do, Dr. May. You know where I stand on this. I think that I don't know how to go about doing it. I'm not even sure what all those acronyms mean that you're throwing out, but if any of them can pull it off to where they hold people accountable, that'd be awesome. But you remember early on in this process, you know, it was stated by somebody, if we can't, you know, make them do it, we'll shame them into it. And then that, I love the idea of accountability. Otherwise, we're going to be back here in 4 or 5 years and we're going to be going over the same stuff and seeing what progress we've made and in a lot of different areas. I don't really understand totally why we can't achieve in the majority of these things, 100%. You know, I mean, wouldn't you hate to be the school district that one of these tragedies occurred in? So I don't know. You know, it kind of goes back to another thing we talked about early on was a grading system for schools like we do on their educational standards, you know, that they can post on their social media, it gets advertised, how great they're doing from an educational standpoint, but how are they doing from a security standpoint? If I still had kids, and I will have grandkids that are going to be in school locally, I would certainly like to know. So I'm on board with this part of the process. Do I know exactly how to move forward? I don't, but I think it's great discussion. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I'll just say that it kind of all ties together as far as, you know, holding schools accountable, then also making sure that they get provided
Correct.
funding and the tools and everything that's necessary so they can be successful.
Right.
And so somehow or another, it needs to be tailored in a way that
Right.
everybody understands that all these components have to come together.
Yeah. And I think really when you stop and think about this, and the biggest expense that's out there is the physical securities part of it. And there are funding mechanisms. There's going to be the $50 million grant available. There's federal grants that can provide that. And if you look really, really closely at what we've recommended as a commission, most of the resources that we've identified for them and everything that we've talked about is what? Free. Everything, every subcommittee. There are all these free resources out there for them to use. So it's not like we're asking them besides the physical securities part of it to be able to do things that's going to cost them a lot of money. The cost is going to be the physical security side and maybe, you know, staff time more so than anything else. But as far as all the other resources, these resources are free for them, whether it be through resources that the center has, whether it be resources that DESE has for them, whether it be resources that CISA has for them. So there are a tremendous number of free resources that are available. So to me, when those things are there, accountability's got to be important. To me, it's time to take school safety and make it a top priority for our schools.
Dr. May,
Amen.
I think the legislature would appreciate a recommendation from us on accountability if they're going to be given money for this purpose. I mean, I think accountability is a big part of that.
And I just want to add, I think to avoid it being piecemeal, I mean, yes, Tim's unit is going to look at a lot of the physical security things, and Leg Audit might look at those things that are tied to funding, but to kind of make sure that it's a whole system and that all of these different recommendations are being implemented. I think that's where the need for additional assistance and monitoring would come in.
Yes, I completely agree. So are we in agreement that we need to craft something?
Yes.
Is there any opposition to us crafting something? Okay, Dr. Dunn?
You're talking about accountability?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I'm not opposed to it. This is I'll just tell you what was going through my head. I was listening to a story on the radio. I think it was driving over here about unfunded mandates related to changing school start times. I don't know if anyone heard that story. And, you know, this was in, I think they were using California as an example, and that there were unintended consequences that did cost money. And so, and I could give you some examples, but had to do with, changing the times of school, then shifted times for when the after school activities would be, and then they had to rent charter buses and all these things. But I just think, I was trying to think about, are there unintended consequences of any of our recommendations that we haven't thought about, sort of downstream effects of things that would cost
I'm
money?
sure there's always going to be.
Yeah, and maybe we just need to at least tip a hat to that, acknowledge it
Yeah.
somewhere in the report, that we can't, because we can't predict everything, and every school district is different. We don't know. So staffing is probably a big one.
And the majority of our schools and our superintendents and their staff are very serious about school safety.
Well, just for instance, I mean, our security subcommittee, we recommended a while ago about the shield and the armor and those things. Well, that's going to cost somebody some money if that's implemented. And but I think that's a positive thing that needs to happen. And so my hope is that as we make these recommendations, that when it does go to the governor and to the legislature, that they're looking at the fact that it can't be pulled out of thin air. That when we ask for additional resource officers, additional commissioned school security officers, even though we don't pay a salary per se, there's still training costs. There are costs involved with licensing them and all that. That I think the legislature needs to take into consideration before mandating something.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that, the first thing that we covered was funding and how important that funding is. And also the accountability. To me, that's where the balance comes in. Try to provide the resources that they need in order for them to get them done, but also be able to make them accountable for getting them done.
Just one comment while we were talking about the funding and stuff and the cost of some of these. I just glanced through the recommendations that we had. And really of the ones we have, the most of the costs probably aren't going to be at the schools. They're going to be on the local law enforcement side.
Yep.
When we're talking about the exercises and so forth, because it's going to be overtime costs because you can't pull everybody off the street during an exercise. So there are some, going back to that kind of downrange effect, there is going to be costs outside of the actual school districts on some of this stuff.
Yep. Mr. Kiefer,
Obviously, I'm new to the education system, so I don't know exactly.
have you started yet?
2 more weeks.
What? I thought it was the
6
15th.
days. 5 days and 2.5
Who's
hours.
counting, right?
You had said a lot of the recommendations that we're pushing forward are free. So is there a way to put it in place that if a school district isn't meeting some of the free recommendations, that they don't get necessarily funding for something else until they meet those free? I mean, it's more of a punishment.
Look at Courtney's face.
But if you can't meet a free recommendation.
Courtney said you.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting thought.
Dr. May.
Hey, Lori.
Hey there. Just in kind of thinking through some of the discussion about this, when you'll have unintended consequences of anything, I think that you do, but to me, the risk of fragmenting this is much greater than the risk of those unintended consequences. And by that, I mean, you described possibly having a unit or a group of folks to coordinate this in terms of monitoring and accountability. Having that one central group or division, department, whatever, who is charged with monitoring that keeps it more together. and I believe can collaborate with the law enforcement and those outside partners that need to be a piece of that. But, you know, if you start pushing this out and giving pieces of monitoring and accountability to different areas, you're going to lose the intended purpose and spirit behind these recommendations. And at the end of the day, I think that's really what we want to maintain, is
Yeah.
what we're trying to accomplish and how we want to support schools in this work. You know, a lot of times when people hear accountability, they feel like that's always going to be punitive, and that's not the case. We just need to be sure that everybody is doing what they can to make these recommendations as they become law or policy or whatever work for everyone. And so to me, just having that, you know, in just some sort of central oversight keeps that, well, makes it less likely for that fragmentation to happen.
So, okay. So I think we're good about moving on with that. We'll think about it. We've got a whole extra day for next week. Remember, we're meeting on Wednesday instead of Tuesday. The last thing that I want to talk about is that, you know, we all know that what we're doing here is providing a series of recommendations. And then what happens to them is up to the legislators, potentially the governor. But there's another group that's kind of in between us and legislators, and that's the Safe Schools Committee of DESE. Who chairs that committee? The person with the big smile on her face, me. So we met a couple weeks ago, and the primary purpose of the committee is to make any legislation or rules or policy recommendations to legislators and the State Board of Education. And so we started looking at things last meeting, and there were a couple of things that the committee decided to put forward, and that was making the change in the legislation for locking all doors and exits. They also decided to move forward on requiring school safety coordinators, making that recommendation. The recommendation about behavioral threat assessment teams being required if a school district has an anonymous or confidential reporting system. And then last, and I know a legislator that's very interested in this one, requiring a 1-hour basic mental health awareness class for classified bus drivers, cafeteria workers, janitors, the ones that have a lot of contact with our kids. And the class is already ready, it's there. And so those were the ones that were already pushed out of committee. And then the next thing is to talk about these with other folks, legislators, the governor's office, obviously leadership at DESE on what we do. So we're making progress already, because it is important. I mean, you know, we've spent 3 months. It's been an enormous amount of work because we all care about our kids and we want them to be safe. And I can't thank you all enough for all the time and effort that you've put into this. So that's it on my list. Is there anything else? And we thought we were going to have a short meeting today. Told you, didn't I? Is there anything else we need to talk about before next week? Okay. Next week, our meeting is Wednesday, the 21st, same place, same time, different day. Go Steelers. That had to come out of my mouth. I'm sorry.
There's no
So-
place for that kind of talk here.
Good. Okay. If there's nothing else, consider our meeting today adjourned. Thank you, guys. Bye.